My husband emptied our joint account for his mistress, thinking I'd be left with nothing. 24 hours later, his world collapsed when he discovered I owned Horizon Oil, the company that paid his salary all along. He never questioned why I kept my maiden name. I stared at my phone screen, the banking app showing a balance of $212.47 where $897,000 had been just yesterday. Dylan's message still illuminated my screen. I need space, going away with Alexa for a while. 6 years of marriage reduced to 13 words and a decimated bank account. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to discover, was that the Morgan Energy executive he reported to every day wasn't just a woman with the same last name as mine. She was me. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in my private office on the 43rd floor of the Houston high-rise, the sprawling Texas oil fields visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. For years, I'd played the role of Rita Morgan, supportive, wife to Dylan Parker, the ambitious but ultimately mid-level executive. Meanwhile, Rita J. Morgan, CEO of Horizon Oil, made decisions that determined the fate of thousands, including my husband. I remember the moment we met, 6 years ago, at the industry charity gala. Dylan had approached me with that confident smile, introduced himself as an up-and-coming energy sector analyst. "And what do you do?" he'd asked, his eyes already revealing he'd categorized me based on my appearance. "I work in oil," I'd said, simply. "Oh, administration? Human resources?" he'd replied automatically. I hadn't corrected him. It had seemed simpler then, less complicated. I'd built Horizon Oil from the ground up after inheriting my father's failing drilling operation at 26. 4 years of relentless work had transformed it into an energy empire, but it had also taught me how men in the industry looked at women who outranked them. So when Dylan assumed I was in some support role, I let him. When we started dating and he spoke condescendingly about explaining energy markets to me, I nodded and smiled. When he proposed and suggested I might want to scale back at work to focus on our future family, I agreed without specifying what my work actually entailed. Some might call it deception. I called it self-preservation. Our prenuptial agreement had been meticulously constructed. He'd thought to protect his superior assets and future earnings. He never questioned why I insisted on keeping my maiden name professionally. Brand. Building, I'd explained. He'd found it adorably naive. And now he'd cleared out the account I deliberately kept modest, the one I regularly transferred funds into from my private accounts. The account he thought represented our entire liquid net worth. The glass door to my office opened. Cassandra Reed, my CFO and closest confidant, entered with a tablet in hand. She was the only executive at Horizon who knew the CEO's husband also worked for the company, carefully insulated in a division 3 levels removed from direct contact with me. "He's still in the system," she said without preamble. "Used his corporate card an hour ago. 4 seasons in Maui, 2 guests. Premium ocean view." I nodded, remaining outwardly calm, though my fingers tightened around my phone. "And Jules confirmed the withdrawal?" "Complete drain, except for the minimum balance to keep the account open. $896,787.53 transferred to his private account, then immediately wired to an offshore account established yesterday. The plotting, the planning, it must have been going on for months. All while sharing my bed, my home, my life. And the woman? Alexa? Cassandra's expression tightened. Alexa Torres, 26, junior analyst in his department, started 8 months ago. Of course. I'd even seen her name on personnel reports, approved her hiring without a second thought. The betrayal had layers, each one more bitter than the last. I turned to the window, watching a thunderstorm gathering on the horizon, dark clouds moving across the vast Texas sky. perfect weather to match my mood. He doesn't know about the board meeting tomorrow, I said quietly. No, Cassandra confirmed. The quarterly leadership meeting is on the calendar, but as always, the executive participants are listed by title, not name. The meeting where I would be unveiling Horizon's acquisition of Partech Industries, Dylan's pet project for the past year. The acquisition he'd championed to his superiors, unaware that his recommendations were being passed up directly to me. The deal that would have earned him a substantial promotion and bonus. A promotion I had been planning to announce personally, finally revealing my identity to him in what I had imagined would be a moment of shared triumph. A revelation that would allow us to finally share both parts of our lives openly. What do you want to do? Cassandra asked, her voice gentle but practical. The storm outside was getting closer, lightning flashing across the darkening sky. 6 years of compartmentalizing my life, of listening to Dylan explain my own industry to me, of smiling through business dinners where he dismissed diversity, hires, in leadership positions. All of it crashed through the careful walls I'd built between my personal and professional lives. I thought about the nights I'd slipped out of bed to take emergency calls from oil rigs, explaining to a half-awake Dylan that my administrative job sometimes needed odd hours. The vacations interrupted because of friend emergencies that were actually international acquisition negotiations. The condescending way he'd pat my hand when I expressed opinions about energy policy, assuring me that these matters were complicated, all while I was steering a multi-billion-dollar company through the most volatile energy market in decades. I'd maintain the charade partly out of a desire for normalcy, for a relationship untainted by wealth and power dynamics. But I'd also known, deep down, that Dylan had shown me exactly who he was from the beginning. He'd never seen me. He'd seen the version of me that fit his worldview, and now he'd proven just how limited that vision really was. Rita? Cassandra prompted. I turned from the window, my decision crystallizing with the clarity that had built my empire. Cancel his corporate cards, freeze his company email and access credentials, have security ready at all locations. My voice was calm, measured, the voice that had closed billion-dollar deals and outmaneuvered industry giants. And prepare a special presentation for tomorrow's board meeting. We're making some changes to the Partech acquisition strategy. Cassandra nodded, already tapping notes into her tablet. And Jules? I added. Have her gather the documentation? On the joint account withdrawal. Every detail. Then contact my personal attorney. Lightning flashed again, closer now, illuminating my reflection in the window. CEO, energy mogul, betrayed wife. For 6 years, I'd allowed Dylan to believe he was married to a shadow of who I really was. Tomorrow, the full reality would dawn on him with the harsh clarity of the Texas sun. He'd emptied our account, thinking he was leaving me with nothing. He had no idea that I was about to return the favor. We've all experienced that moment when someone shows you exactly who they are, when the mask slips and you see the truth you've been avoiding. Perhaps you've felt that stomach-dropping sensation of betrayal, the cold realization that someone you trusted has been living a double life. But what happens when you're the one with the secret identity? If you're new to my channel, welcome. I share these stories not just for entertainment, but because there's power in witnessing the moment when underestimation meets reality. That satisfying instant when someone who thought they were clever discovers they weren't seeing the full picture. For those who've been following along, you know I don't believe in simple revenge tales. This isn't about getting even. It's about reclaiming your power when someone tries to take it from you. Before we dive deeper into this journey, take a moment to hit that subscribe button below. It's completely free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss another story of justice served with a side of poetic timing. Let's return to that moment in my Houston high-rise, when I realized my husband hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd underestimated the woman he claimed to know better than anyone else, a mistake that would cost him everything he thought he was clever enough to steal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What do you do when someone takes what they believe is everything you have? When they empty an account thinking they've left you destitute? When they run off to paradise with your money and someone half your age? If you're me, you take a deep breath. You straighten your designer jacket. And you prepare to remind them exactly who they're dealing with. Because sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one planning a betrayal. It's the one they never truly saw in the first place. The Texas oil industry operates on unspoken rules, as old as the first wells that punctured the state's vast plains. It's a world of weathered men in custom suits, of quiet deals made over bourbon, of legacies passed from father to son, rarely to daughter. The gleaming Houston skyline, built on crude and ambition, houses the headquarters of empires that power the world while operating by their own internal laws of hierarchy and respect. My life existed in perfect compartmentalization. By day, the 43rd floor of Morgan Tower belonged to Rita J. Morgan, the calculating CEO who had transformed her father's failing operation into Horizon Oil, now the third largest independent energy company in North America. My boardroom was a battlefield where I'd earned respect through ruthless precision and uncanny market instincts. But each evening, I would descend from that tower, drive my deliberately modest Audi to our River Oaks home, and transform into Rita Parker, supportive wife to a mid-level executive with outsized ambitions. I'd listen to Dylan explain industry, movements I'd orchestrated, nodding as he simplified concepts I'd pioneered. Our home reflected this duality perfectly. Dylan had insisted on the River Oaks address, prestigious enough to impress his colleagues, but within reach for a couple he believed was living primarily on his income. The decorating choices were all his: masculine leather furniture, a dedicated whiskey room where he entertained his work friends, walls decorated with photos of his college rowing team and industry awards. My presence was minimized to tasteful touches he'd barely notice. First edition books hidden in plain sight, art pieces by women whose significance he never researched, and a small study he rarely entered where I kept my hobby paperwork. He called it my little project room, with the indulgent affection of someone humoring a child. What he never realized was that I'd designed the house with two completely separate internet networks, a voice-activated security system only I could control, and a panic room disguised as a linen closet. Just as he never questioned why I insisted on managing our modest investments myself. In the energy sector, power is measured in barrels, access, and information. The right drilling rights, the right political connections, the right technological innovations, each a currency more valuable than money. The mostly male executive ranks operated on a mixture of merit, connections, and confidence, the latter often substituting for the former. Dylan had been given opportunities because he looked the part. Tall, handsome, with the easy confidence of a man who'd never questioned his right to be in the room. He worked hard, certainly, but his career had benefited from an invisible escalator that seemed to carry men like him upward with minimal effort. I, meanwhile, had built Horizon through strategy and stealth. When I inherited my father's company, most of the board had expected me to sell immediately. Instead, I'd mastered every aspect of the business, from geological assessments to international finance. I'd made myself indispensable by being better prepared than anyone else in any room, and I'd learned quickly to operate behind the Morgan name rather than my face. Video conferences were technically challenging, allowing my ideas to be judged on merit rather than gender. Key negotiations happened through carefully chosen male representatives when necessary, with me as the unseen puppet master. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd applied the same strategy to my marriage. Our social circle straddled both worlds while keeping them separate. Country club memberships, charity galas, industry events. I navigated them all with practiced ease. The wives of Dylan's colleagues knew me as the supportive spouse who organized dinner parties and remembered their children's names. They never connected me to the mysterious Rita J. Morgan, whose name occasionally appeared in industry publications, whose company's decisions affected their husbands' careers. The rare times someone made the connection, I'd laugh it off as a coincidence. Morgan's a common name, I'd say. I wish I had her bank account. Meanwhile, my executive team knew me as a private person who kept her personal life separate from business. Cassandra was the exception, my Harvard Business School roommate who'd been with me since the beginning. She understood why I'd chosen this peculiar double life, even if she didn't fully approve. What Dylan never saw was the network I'd built around us. Jules Parker, no relation despite the shared surname, ran my personal financial operations with military precision. Cole Wright, my chief security officer, ensured that Horizon's digital and physical assets remained protected, including keeping a discreet eye on key executives like my husband, and Archie Donovan, my silver-haired attorney, who'd worked with my father before me, had structured both my corporate holdings and my personal life with labyrinthine care. The prenuptial agreement Dylan thought protected his assets had actually been designed by Archie to shield my empire while appearing standard to Dylan's less experienced lawyer. The world I'd built was one of mirrors and carefully managed perceptions. I'd created a life where I could experience what I craved most, being valued for myself rather than my wealth or power, while protecting the company I'd sacrificed everything to build. Until Dylan shattered that careful construction with a single bank transfer and 13 callous words. Dylan Parker had always been handsome in that effortless way that opened doors. 6'2" with salt and pepper hair that had started graying prematurely in his 20s, giving him an air of distinction beyond his years. His confidence wasn't just a personality trait. It was a carefully cultivated resource, deployed strategically in boardrooms and bedrooms alike. I'd watched him for 6 years, studying the subtle shift in his smile when addressing superiors versus subordinates. The way he'd lower his voice slightly when issuing directives, raise it when seeking approval. He played the corporate game with the precision of someone who'd spent his life preparing for it. "You can't teach presence," he'd once told me while adjusting his tie before a dinner party. "Either you have it or you don't." His reflection had caught mine in the mirror, his expression softening with that particular blend of affection and condescension he reserved for me. "Like you, honey. You have a way of making people comfortable. It's why you're so good with my colleagues' wives." What he meant, of course, was that I knew my place, that I understood the role of corporate spouse, supportive, decorative, unthreatening. The perfect backdrop against which ambitious men could shine. The first time I saw that look, I should have ended things. Instead, I became curious. How deep did his assumptions run? Was this a man capable of seeing beyond his own preconceptions? Or was he, like so many I'd encountered in business, content with the comfortable fiction that women existed primarily to facilitate men's ambitions? It became an experiment of sorts, one that extended from our first date to our marriage. I never lied about my career. I did indeed work in oil. I simply allowed him to fill in the blanks with his assumptions. And those assumptions revealed more about Dylan than any direct question could have. When I mentioned market fluctuations affecting my work, he explained basic economics to me. When I discussed drilling innovations, he simplified the technology as if speaking to a child. When I mentioned office politics, he offered patronizing advice on not getting involved in the big decisions. 6 years of testing, and he had failed consistently, spectacular in his inability to see beyond the narrow role he'd assigned me. Yet there had been moments, flashes of the man I'd hoped he might be. The night he found me reading an industry analysis at 2 a.m. and quietly brought me tea instead of questioning my interest. The afternoon he defended a female colleague being talked over in a meeting. Small glimpses of potential awareness that kept me holding on, hoping that eventually he might truly see me. That hope had died gradually, then suddenly, like the bankruptcy curve he'd once mansplained to me. "Companies don't fail overnight, honey," he'd lectured, sketching a graph on a napkin during dinner. They deteriorate slowly, then collapse all at once. That's why most people never see it coming. The irony wasn't lost on me now. Across from my CEO desk sat Cassandra Reed, the antithesis of Dylan in every meaningful way. Where he assumed, she questioned. Where he projected, she observed. As Horizon Oil's CFO, her financial acumen was legendary in the industry, but it was her emotional intelligence that had made her my most trusted ally. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked, her voice calibrated to professional concern with just enough personal warmth. "There are less dramatic ways to handle the situation." I appreciated that she didn't try to soften the betrayal or offer platitudes. Cassandra dealt in realities, not comforting fictions. "He stole almost $900,000 from our joint account, Cass," I replied, tapping my pen against the quarterly report on my desk. "He's in Maui with a woman 13 years his junior, spending money he thinks is mine, having emptied what he believes are my life savings. What would you suggest as an appropriate response?" She arched a perfect eyebrow. "Most people would call a divorce attorney. I already have. But this isn't just about our marriage. This is about Horizon." Dylan's division had been pushing for the Partech acquisition for months. The company had developed a promising extraction technology that could increase yield by 32% while reducing environmental impact. A rare combination in our industry. On paper, it was exactly the type of investment Horizon should make. But my team had uncovered concerning patents buried in Partech's portfolio, potential legal liabilities that Dylan's analysis had either missed or deliberately overlooked. The board meeting tomorrow would determine whether Horizon proceeded with the acquisition, a meeting where I had planned to finally reveal my identity to my husband as I announced his promotion to Vice President of Acquisitions. A position I'd created specifically for him based on his work ethic and apparent dedication. "The personal and professional have collided," I continued. "I can't separate them now, even if I wanted to." Cassandra nodded, the gesture acknowledging both the practical and emotional dimensions of my statement. "I've had Cole track their movements. They arrived in Maui 3 hours ago. Hotel records show they've booked the suite for 2 weeks. Cole Wright had appeared silently in the doorway, tablet in hand. As head of security for Horizon, his perpetually vigilant expression matched his former career in military intelligence. He was a man of few words and impeccable timing. "Ms. Morgan," he nodded respectfully, "we've confirmed the funds transfer. Mr. Parker withdrew the full amount from your joint account, converted it to cryptocurrency to obscure the trail, then reconverted to cash after it passed through 3 digital wallets." "Not his first rodeo," I murmured. The methodical approach suggested planning, research. This wasn't an impulsive act, but a calculated extraction. "Access to the building? His credentials are still active, as you requested. If he returns, security will alert you immediately but allow entry." I nodded, turning to the rain-streaked windows overlooking Houston's energy corridor. Dozens of gleaming towers housing companies that competed, collaborated, and collided in the elaborate dance of the oil industry. Somewhere in one of those buildings, decisions were being made about Partech, about Horizon, about the future of energy extraction and distribution. Decisions that would ultimately come back to my office, to my authority, just as Dylan's future would. "Maintain surveillance but no intervention," I instructed Cole. "Let's see what he does next." After Cole departed, Cassandra leaned forward slightly. "What are you really planning, Rita? This isn't just about the money or even the affair. Issei was right, of course. $900,000 was substantial to most people, but it represented less than 0.02% of my net worth. And infidelity, while painful, wasn't entirely surprising given the gradual cooling of our relationship over the past year. "Do you remember the Sinclair negotiation?" I asked instead of answering directly. Cassandra's eyes widened slightly in recognition. 3 years ago, Sinclair Energy had attempted a hostile takeover of one of our subsidiaries. using insider information leaked by a trusted executive. Instead of fighting them directly, I'd allowed them to proceed down a carefully constructed path that eventually led to their CEO's resignation and Horizon acquiring their most valuable assets at a fraction of market value. "You're playing the long game," she said. It wasn't a question. "Dylan made a choice," I replied, my voice steady. "He chose to see me as someone who could be discarded, someone whose resources could be plundered without consequence. I'm simply going to show him the full implications of that choice." I turned back to my desk, pulling up tomorrow's board presentation on my tablet. Have Jules prepare a complete accounting of Dylan's company holdings, stock options, retirement accounts, everything tied to Horizon, and ask Archie to join us for dinner tonight. We have contracts to review. Cassandra stood, understanding the dismissal in my tone. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not about him. He's proven exactly who he is. I'm sorry that you invested 6 years in someone who couldn't see what was right in front of him." After she left, I sat alone in the gathering darkness, watching lightning flash across the Houston skyline. In the reflection of my office windows, I could see both versions of myself superimposed, Rita the wife and Rita the CEO merging into one unified image. Tomorrow, Dylan would finally see the same. The moment that crystallized everything happened, 12 hours before I discovered the emptied account. Monday evening, I'd arrived home later than usual after finalizing the Partech acquisition documents. Our River Oaks house was lit up like a display home, every light blazing despite the fact that Dylan supposedly had a late strategy meeting. I'd noticed small inconsistencies over the previous weeks. Hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered rooms, missing receipts from our shared expense tracking app, late nights with increasingly vague explanations, the classic signs obvious to anyone paying attention. But that night, something felt different. There was an energy in our home, a sense of emptiness that went beyond physical absence. In our bedroom, drawers were slightly askew, the closet door left partially open, small disruptions in the careful order we both maintained. I didn't need to count his shirts or check his luggage to know something was happening. After 6 years of marriage, you develop a sixth sense for disturbance. I'd sat on our bed, running my hands over the Egyptian cotton sheets he'd insisted on importing from a specific boutique in Milan. On his nightstand, a framed photo of us at last year's energy sector charity gala had been turned face down. Not removed, that would be too definitive, too committed, just placed face down. The coward's method of erasure. My phone had buzzed with a notification. Another leadership profile mentioning Horizon Oil's mysterious CEO who rarely appeared in public, but whose strategic decisions had transformed the industry. Rita J. Morgan continues to lead from behind the scenes, the article stated, proving that physical presence is less important than intellectual impact. If only the author knew how literal that assessment was. I'd opened my banking app then, a small knot of suspicion forming. Our joint checking account showed normal activity, bills paid, usual transfers, nothing suspicious. But something about the bedroom's disruption nagged at me. Setting my phone down, I'd walk to his closet and press the hidden panel that revealed his wall safe, a feature he thought was his secret, though I'd had it installed during a renovation. He'd been too busy to oversee. The combination was predictable. His college graduation year followed by his birthday. Inside, the passport and emergency cash reserve he always maintained were gone. Still, I hadn't jumped to conclusions. International travel was part of his position. Cash was sometimes needed for certain business cultures. There could be explanations. Then I'd found the Partech file on his home desk, carelessly left open with sections highlighted that contradicted the analysis he'd presented to his division. Pages showing potentially problematic patents were marked with his distinctive red slashes, yet his official report had declared the acquisition clean from a legal standpoint. That was when I knew. Not just about the affair, which seemed almost trivial in comparison, but about who my husband truly was. The man I'd married, the man I'd allowed to believe I was less than I am, wasn't just betraying me personally. He was compromising professionally, willing to risk his company's position for whatever incentive Partech had offered him on the side. I'd taken a seat at his desk, pulled out my CEO phone, the secure device only 5 people had the number for, and called Cassandra. "I need a complete audit of the Partech deal," I'd told her without preamble. "And I need Jules to lock down all our personal accounts except the joint checking. Leave that one accessible." "Rita?" Her voice had reflected rare uncertainty. "What's happening?" "I'm setting a trap," I'd replied, looking at the highlighted documents, the missing passport, the face-down photograph, with very expensive bait. That night, I'd transferred an additional $500,000 into our joint account, funds that would appear as a routine movement from our investments, but would create an irresistible target. Then I'd packed a small overnight bag and checked into the Four Seasons downtown, the hotel I used when working too late to drive home. I'd slept surprisingly well, knowing what was likely coming. There's a certain peace that accompanies absolute clarity. The next morning, I'd dressed in one of my power suits, a custom Armani in charcoal with subtle red pinstriping, chosen specifically for the board meeting where I'd planned to finally unite my dual lives. I'd gone through my usual morning routine at the hotel, then headed directly to Horizon's headquarters. The storm outside matched my mood, dark clouds releasing the occasional warning rumble, but holding their full fury in reserve. Just as I was by the time I reached my office, the alert from my banking app had already appeared. $896,787.53 transferred out. The bait taken, the trap sprung. Dylan's message had come 30 minutes later. "I need space. Going away with Alexa for a while." 13 words that revealed everything about our 6 years together. Not even the courtesy of a fabricated explanation or a perfunctory apology. Just the confident assumption that I would accept whatever narrative he chose to present. The same confidence that had led him to believe he could take majority stakeholders' money without consequence. I'd sat at my desk, staring at those 13 words, feeling a complex emotion that wasn't quite anger or grief, but something more refined. A blend of vindication and resolve. I'd known, on some level, that this moment would come eventually. Had perhaps even engineered it, creating the perfect conditions to reveal a truth I'd suspected from the beginning. That Dylan hadn't married me. He'd married the idea of me, the supportive wife, the pleasant companion, the unchallenging partner, who would never outshine him. He'd married the mask, not the woman behind it. And now he was about to meet the woman he'd never truly known. The storm finally broke as I set my phone down. Lightning cracked across the sky, thunder following immediately after. The delay between flash and sound collapsed to nothing. The distance between intention and consequence eliminated, just as it would be for Dylan, very soon. "Rita," Cassandra's voice came through the intercom. "The board members are beginning to arrive for the meeting, and we've just received confirmation. Partech's representatives are here as well." "Thank you, Cassandra," I replied, rising from my desk and smoothing my suit jacket. "Please tell Archie to proceed with the financial lockdown measures we discussed, and have Cole prepare the presentation materials I sent him this morning." For a moment, I caught my reflection in the rain-streaked windows of my office. I looked exactly like what I was, a CEO preparing to make a decisive business move. Nothing in my appearance suggested a woman who had just been betrayed by her husband. Nothing revealed the personal dimension of what was about to unfold, which was precisely the point. As I gathered my materials and headed toward the boardroom, my phone buzzed with an update from the private investigator I'd had following Dylan for the past month. Attached was a photo of my husband and Alexa Torres toasting with champagne on a private balcony overlooking the Pacific. her hand displaying a diamond ring that explained the unusual withdrawal from a secondary account he'd made last week, an engagement ring purchased while still married to me. The final confirmation I needed. The doors to the boardroom loomed ahead. Behind them, the 12 people who would witness the first public merging of Rita Parker and Rita J. Morgan. 12 people who would see Dylan's professional world collapse simultaneously with his personal deception. I paused, took a steadying breath, and pushed the doors open. Dylan Parker hadn't always been the man who would empty a joint account and flee to Maui with his mistress. 6 years ago, when we first met at the industry charity gala, he'd been charming, attentive, and seemingly genuine. His ambition was obvious but not yet toxic, his confidence appealing rather than arrogant. I remember watching him from across the room before he approached me. He moved with the easy grace of someone who felt entitled to occupy any space. Men deferred to him slightly, women tracked his movements. Not because of exceptional looks or wealth, but because he projected certainty in a world of hesitation. "You don't belong here," were his first words to me, accompanied by a smile that softened what might have sounded like an insult. "Excuse me?" I'd replied, genuinely caught off guard. "Everyone else is networking," he explained, nodding toward the clusters of industry executives exchanging business cards and rehearsed pitches. "You're actually looking at the art." He was right. I'd been examining a painting donated by a local artist for the charity auction, an abstract representation of an oil field at sunset. "It's beautiful," I'd said, though the artist took some creative liberties with the environmental impact. He'd laughed then, a genuine sound that reached his eyes. "Dylan Parker," he introduced himself. "Mid-level executive at Horizon Oil. Not quite important enough to be invited, but ambitious enough to buy a ticket anyway." The irony of him working for my company without knowing who I was had amused me. It seemed like fate, or at least an interesting coincidence worth exploring. "Rita Morgan," I'd replied, using my maiden name automatically. "I work in oil too." What had followed was a pleasant conversation about the industry, during which Dylan had indeed made assumptions about my role, but had also listened attentively to my observations. He'd asked for my number before leaving to work the room, and I'd given it, curious about where this might lead. Our courtship had unfolded with traditional efficiency. Dinners at restaurants impressive enough to demonstrate his taste, but not so expensive they'd strain his apparent budget. Weekend getaways carefully calculated to be romantic, yet fiscally responsible. A lifestyle designed to impress without revealing any insecurity about resources. The first significant crack had appeared 6 months in, during a dinner with his friends, other mid-level executives and their partners. One of the women had mentioned reading an article about Horizon's innovative approach to sustainability. "It's remarkable what Rita J. Morgan has accomplished with that company," she'd said. "Taking her father's outdated operation and transforming it into an industry leader in both profitability and environmental standards." Dylan had smiled tightly. "Morgan's just the figurehead. Everyone knows the real decisions come from her executive team, mostly men who've been in the industry for decades. She's smart enough to take their advice and stay out of the way." The table had murmured general agreement, except for one man who'd frowned slightly. "I don't know. I worked on a project with her team last year. Never met her directly, but the strategic decisions had a consistency that suggested a single visionary rather than committee thinking." "Trust me," Dylan had replied with that particular tone he used when brooking no disagreement. "No woman builds that kind of operation independently. She inherited the company and the executives who run it." I'd said nothing, sipping my wine and noting how quickly he dismissed accomplished women even when he had no direct knowledge. It should have been my warning sign. Instead, I'd seen it as a challenge. The pattern continued and intensified after our marriage. Dylan's charm remained, in place for social situations, client meetings, and whenever he needed something from someone. But in private, his dismissiveness toward women in leadership positions became more pronounced. "It's not sexism," he'd explain when I questioned this tendency. "It's reality. The oil industry requires a certain mentality, a certain approach that's fundamentally masculine. There are exceptions, of course, but they're rare." Meanwhile, his ambition curdled into something darker. Each promotion came with increased expectations for our lifestyle: a larger house, more exclusive memberships, higher-end vehicles. Status symbols became necessities rather than luxuries. I watched the transformation with a scientist's detachment, curious how far it would go, how completely the promising man I'd met would be consumed by his own narrowing perspective. The Partek situation had revealed the final evolution. Dylan had been assigned to lead the assessment team, a significant responsibility that could position him for the VP role he coveted. Initial reports had been thorough and promising. Partek's extraction technology could revolutionize Horizon's efficiency while reducing environmental impact. But then something had changed. His enthusiasm for the deal intensified beyond the data's support. He began dismissing concerns raised by his team members. The legal review he submitted glossed over potential patent issues that should have raised red flags. A week before the board meeting, I'd had Cole quietly investigate. The results were illuminating. 3 private meetings between Dylan and Partek's CEO at a discreet cigar bar in the warehouse district, a wire transfer of $50,000 to a newly established offshore account, 2 calls with a luxury real estate agent in Aspen about properties far beyond a Horizon executive's salary range. My husband had graduated from dismissing women to dismissing ethics. The affair with Alexa Torres had started around the same time as the Partek negotiations intensified. Security footage showed them leaving the office together, their professional distance carefully maintained until they reached her apartment building. Credit card statements revealed dinners at restaurants deliberately far from our usual haunts, hotel charges disguised as conference accommodations. Their relationship wasn't the cause of Dylan's moral compromise. It was a symptom. Both represented his belief that he deserved more than he had, regardless of who got hurt in the process. The most revealing moment had come just 3 days ago, during what would be our last dinner together. I'd intentionally mentioned concerns about our finances, testing whether he would reveal any of his plans. "I'm a little worried about our savings," I'd said casually. "The market's been volatile lately." He'd reached across the table, patting my hand with patronizing affection. "Don't worry your pretty head about that, honey. I've got everything under control. In fact, I'm working on something that's going to change everything for us. Just trust me." There it was, the perfect opportunity to come clean, to treat me as a partner rather than a possession. Instead, he'd offered condescension paired with the lie of omission. That was when I'd decided to let the trap spring shut, to stop observing the experiment and start acting on its results. As I prepared to enter the boardroom, I thought about the man Dylan had become. Not a monster, which would have been simpler. Just an ordinary man whose character had gradually corroded under the acid of unexamined privilege and unchallenged assumptions. A man who believed he could take what wasn't his, money, company secrets, another woman's future, without consequence. Man about to discover just how wrong he was. The Horizon Oil boardroom embodied understated power. 20 feet of polished black walnut table surrounded by ergonomic leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Houston's skyline, and discreet technology that appeared only when needed. The room was designed to focus attention on the people within it, rather than its own opulence. As I entered, 12 faces turned toward me, 10 board members and 2 Partek representatives. Cassandra was already seated at her customary position near the head of the table, tablet ready, expression neutral save for the slight arch of her eyebrow that acknowledged our shared understanding of what was about to unfold. "Good morning," I greeted them, moving to the CEO's position at the head of the table. "Thank you for accommodating the earlier start time." Most of the board members had worked with me for years, though our interactions typically happened via secure video conference or through carefully orchestrated in-person meetings, where my identity remained shielded from anyone outside our inner circle. Today would be different. Before we begin, I continued, I'd like to introduce our guests from Partech Industries, Victor Reed, CEO, and Alexa Torres, Junior Analyst. I kept my gaze steady as I said Alexa's name, watching her face for any reaction. She was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-20s with the polished appearance of someone who spent considerable time on self-presentation. Her expression flickered briefly with confusion at my direct acknowledgement, then settled back into professional neutrality. She didn't recognize me. We'd never met formally, despite her affair with my husband. The magnitude of Dylan's compartmentalization was almost impressive. Ms. Morgan, Victor Reed nodded respectfully. It's an honor to finally meet you in person. Your reputation precedes you? As does yours, Mr. Reed, I replied, my tone pleasant but giving nothing away. I've reviewed your technology proposals with great interest. The meeting began with standard procedure, quarterly reports, market projections, operational updates delivered by various executives. I guided the discussion with practiced efficiency, demonstrating the leadership style that had built Horizon into an industry powerhouse. Each minute that passed revealed more of my hidden strength to the Partech representatives. The decisive authority in my directives. The comprehensive understanding of complex technical issues. The sharp questions that cut straight to the heart of financial projections. This wasn't the performance of someone who had inherited power. It was the natural expression of earned expertise. I noticed Alexa's growing discomfort as the meeting progressed. She kept glancing at her phone, then back at me with increasing frequency. I could almost see the gears turning as she tried to place my face, my name, wondering why something felt familiar yet wrong. An hour into the meeting, we reached the Partech discussion. The acquisition proposal appeared on the room's displays, projected, purchase price, integration timeline, projected ROI. I asked Victor Reed to present his company's perspective. Partech's extraction technology represents a quantum leap forward, he began, standing to address the board. Our proprietary methods have demonstrated a 32% increase in yield during field tests, with a corresponding 18% reduction in environmental impact. He continued his pitch with the confidence of someone who believed the deal was already secured. Behind his polished presentation, I noted the occasional glance toward Alexa, subtle signals passing between them. Not romantic, strategic. After he finished, I smiled pleasantly. Very impressive, Mr. Reed. I have just a few questions before we proceed. What followed wasn't the gentle inquiry he expected. Instead, I systematically dismantled Partech's proposal, highlighting patent vulnerabilities their legal team had attempted to obscure, pointing out methodological flaws in their field tests, and questioning financial projections that appeared artificially inflated. These patent issues, I said, displaying documentation on the room's screens, present significant liability concerns, particularly this technology component, which appears to infringe on existing patents held by 3 different companies. Victor Reed's confident demeanor faltered. Our legal team has assured me. Your legal team missed critical details, I interrupted smoothly. Or perhaps they were instructed to overlook them. The room grew tense as the implications became clear. The Partech proposal wasn't just flawed, it was potentially fraudulent. There's also the matter of the field test data, I continued, bringing up side-by-side comparisons of their reported results versus our independent assessment. Our analysis indicates significant discrepancies that call the entire technology claim into question. Victor Reed's face had paled noticeably. Alexa Torres was now staring openly at me, her expression a mixture of shock and growing recognition. Furthermore, I said, we have evidence suggesting improper influence was exerted on the Horizon assessment team assigned to evaluate this acquisition. The final slide appeared on screen, banking records showing transfers from Partech subsidiary accounts to offshore holdings, followed by Dylan's signature on deliberately falsified assessment documents. This constitutes not just a breach of corporate ethics, I stated calmly, but potentially criminal fraud. The board members exchanged alarmed glances. Victor Reed had stopped trying to maintain his composure, now openly displaying panic. Alexa Torres had gone completely still, her eyes fixed on me with dawning horror. "Ms. Morgan," Reed began, his voice strained. "There must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Mr. Reed. My security team has thoroughly documented the interactions between your company and certain Horizon employees, including private meetings not disclosed to our compliance department, financial incentives offered to influence the acquisition assessment, and personal relationships formed to facilitate access to confidential information." At the word relationships, Alexa Torres finally made the connection. Her gaze dropped to my left hand, where my wedding ring gleamed under the boardroom lights, then back to my face. The color drained from her complexion as she whispered something that looked like Parker. I turned to address the board directly. "In light of these findings, I recommend we decline the Partech acquisition offer and refer this matter to our legal department for further action. Additionally, I suggest we implement immediate protective measures regarding any Horizon intellectual property that may have been compromised." The vote was unanimous. The board members, seasoned executives who recognized both the legal dangers and my controlled anger, aligned behind my recommendation without hesitation. "Thank you for your time today, Mr. Reed, Ms. Torres," I concluded, my voice maintaining its professional tone. "Our security team will escort you from the building. I suggest you contact your legal counsel immediately." As they were led out, Alexa Torres glanced back at me, a question in her eyes that needed no verbal expression. She wanted to know if I had known all along, about the affair, about Dylan, about her unwitting role in a situation far more complex than she had realized. I gave her nothing but the neutral expression of a CEO concluding an unsuccessful business meeting. When the boardroom door closed behind them, Cassandra turned to me. "Well, that's the first phase complete. What's next?" I checked my watch. According to Cole's surveillance, Dylan was currently lounging by the hotel pool in Maui, enjoying what he believed was his clean getaway with my life savings. "Now," I said, "we wait for him to check his accounts." The trap had been set. The first public revelation of my identity accomplished. The business consequences of Dylan's betrayal set in motion. Now it was time for the personal reckoning, the aftermath of the eye. Board meeting unfolded with methodical precision. Security escorted the Partech representatives from the building. Legal began preparing cease and desist orders regarding potentially compromised intellectual property, and PR drafted careful statements about Horizon's decision to decline the acquisition offer. I returned to my office, settling behind my desk as Houston's skyline disappeared behind thickening storm clouds. Rain lashed against the windows, creating shifting patterns that matched my turbulent thoughts. "Dylan's corporate cards have been frozen," Cole reported, standing at attention near the door. "His email access is now restricted to receiving only, and his building credentials have been flagged. If he attempts entry at any Horizon facility, security will alert us immediately." "Has he tried to access any company systems yet?" I asked. "No. According to his phone's location data, he's still at the resort pool. He's made several calls to Victor Reed in the past 20 minutes, but Reed isn't answering." I nodded, picturing Dylan's growing confusion. The carefully constructed house of cards beginning to wobble. "And the personal accounts?" I asked. "As you instructed," Cole replied. "Jules has implemented the financial containment protocol. The joint account remains accessible but flagged for monitoring. All other personal accounts connected to your name have been secured with additional authentication measures. The prenuptial enforcement team is prepared to move on your signal." "Thank you, Cole. Continue monitoring but maintain distance. I want to see what he does when he realizes the professional side is collapsing." After Cole departed, Cassandra entered with a stack of documents requiring my signature, legal authorizations for the next phase of what was rapidly becoming the most comprehensive corporate and personal extraction I'd ever orchestrated. "The board is fully behind you," she said, taking a seat across from me. Robertson asked if there was anything else they needed to know, but I assured him you had the situation under control. James Robertson, our longest-serving board member, had been skeptical when I first took over Horizon. Over time, he'd become one of my strongest supporters, recognizing that my strategic vision had transformed the company's fortunes. His unspoken question was clear. How deep did this situation go, and would it affect Horizon's stability? "The company is insulated," I assured her. Dylan's access to sensitive information was always limited by design. "The real damage is to Partek and to himself, and to you," she added quietly. I paused in my document signing, considering her observation. Was I damaged by this? The betrayal stung, certainly. The casual cruelty of emptying our joint account reflected a fundamental disrespect that couldn't be overlooked. But overwhelmingly, what I felt was a strange relief, the liberation of no longer maintaining a division between my identities. "I'm fine, Cassandra," I said, resuming my signatures. "Better than I've been in years, actually." My phone buzzed, a message from Jules, who was monitoring the financial movements. "He's checking the accounts," the text read. "Just attempted access to your private banking portal. Authentication measures blocked him." Moments later, my phone rang with Dylan's familiar tone. I let it go to voicemail, curious what approach he would take. "Rita, honey." His voice carried the forced casualness of someone trying to sound relaxed while experiencing mounting panic. "Something strange is happening with our accounts. Give me a call when you get this. Probably just a technical glitch." Technical glitch. As though nearly $900,000 had disappeared through some banking system hiccup, rather than his deliberate action. His ability to twist reality was almost admirable in its audacity. The phone rang again immediately. Again, I let it go to voicemail. "Rita, it's me again. I really need you to call me back right away. There's something weird going on with the accounts, and I'm trying to sort it out from here. Also, my corporate cards aren't working for some reason. Call me." The tone had shifted slightly, less casual, more urgent. The first hint of worry creeping in. My office door opened as Archie Donovan arrived, impeccably dressed as always in a tailored suit that conveyed both his legal authority and his old-school professionalism. "I've reviewed the documentation," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the measured cadence of 4 decades in corporate law. "The prenuptial provisions are ironclad, particularly regarding financial malfeasance. The unauthorized removal of funds from the joint account constitutes a triggering event for the punitive clauses in Section 12(3). I nodded, having anticipated this conclusion. "And the Horizon employment contract?" "Even more definitive," Archie confirmed, opening a leather portfolio. "The non-disclosure agreement, conflict of interest provisions, and corporate ethics clauses all provide clear grounds for immediate termination. The evidence of improper influence from Partek meets the contractual definition of corporate espionage." My phone buzzed again, another text from Jules. "He's attempting to transfer funds from the Maui resort back to the joint account. Transaction blocked due to insufficient funds." So he was trying to reverse course, realizing something had gone wrong with his escape plan. The panic would be setting in fully now. As if on cue, my phone rang for a third time. Dylan's increasingly desperate voice filled the voicemail. "Rita, please call me back immediately. There's a serious problem with our accounts. All the money is—" He paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase the fact that he'd taken it himself. "Something's happened to our money, and I can't access any of the other accounts either. My corporate cards are declined, and I just got a strange email from HR about my company login being restricted. What the hell is going on?" The escalating distress was palpable. 3 calls in 15 minutes, each more frantic than the last. The fourth call came as Archie was reviewing the legal steps for the divorce proceedings. This time, I decided to answer. "Hello, Dylan." "Rita." Thank God. Relief flooded his voice. "Something crazy is happening. The joint account is empty, and I can't access any of our other accounts. And now something's going on with my position at Horizon. My cards are declined, my email is restricted, and I just got a call from Victor Reed saying there was some kind of disaster at the Partech meeting. What's happening?" I let the silence stretch for several seconds, savoring the moment of transition from his panic to the dawning realization that would soon follow. "Tell me, Dylan," I said finally, my voice deliberately calm. "How's Maui? And how's Alexa enjoying that new engagement ring?" The shocked silence on the other end of the line was exquisite. What are you talking about?" he stammered. The practiced confidence completely evaporated. "The engagement ring you purchased last week? The one you gave to Alexa, Torres, your coworker, currently staying with you in the premium Ocean View suite at the Four Seasons Maui. The suite you booked using funds withdrawn from our joint account yesterday." Another silence, followed by an attempt to regain control of the situation. "Rita, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I interrupted smoothly. "You've always been very good at explanations, but perhaps you should save them for the Horizon Legal team. They'll be contacting you shortly regarding the termination of your employment and the criminal investigation into your involvement with Partech Industries." "Criminal investigation? What are you talking about? I haven't done anything wrong." The panic had returned, amplified by confusion. The offshore account containing the $50,000 bribe from Partech suggests otherwise, as does your falsified assessment of their patent situation. "How could you possibly know?" He stopped abruptly, finally confronting the reality that I knew far more than should have been possible. "By the way," I continued, "Ms. Torres has already left the resort. My security team observed her departing in a taxi approximately 20 minutes ago, shortly after the board meeting concluded." "Board meeting?" His voice had dropped to a whisper. "What board meeting?" Here it was, the moment of revelation I'd been building toward. The culmination of 6 years of compartmentalized identity. "The Horizon Oil Quarterly Board Meeting," I replied, "where we unanimously rejected the Partech acquisition after I presented evidence of corporate espionage and fraudulent technology. Claims. It was quite dramatic, actually. Ms. Torres seemed especially shocked when she finally realized who I was. The silence that followed contained multitudes: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. I could almost see him connecting the disparate pieces of information, re-examining 6 years of memories through this new lens. "Rita," he finally managed, his voice barely audible. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, Dylan, that you didn't just empty a joint account and betray your wife. You stole from and betrayed Rita J. Morgan, CEO of Horizon Oil, your employer and the woman who's been watching your ethical compromises and infidelity with increasing disappointment." The sound of him sitting down heavily came through the line, the weight of realization finally hitting home. "That's not possible," he whispered. You can't be." "But I am," I replied simply. "And I always have been." The silence on the phone stretched until I wondered if Dylan had disconnected. Finally, his voice returned, strained and barely recognizable. "How long?" he asked. "How long have you been this?" "I inherited Horizon Oil from my father 8 years ago," I replied evenly. 2 years before we met. I've been CEO the entire time we've known each other. But your name? You said you were Rita Morgan, not Rita J. Morgan. Morgan is my maiden name. I kept it professionally when we married. You never asked what the J stood for." I could hear his breathing change as he processed this information, mentally reviewing countless moments that would now appear in a completely different light. "All those charity events," he said slowly. "The late nights you said were for volunteer work, board meetings, investment negotiations, operational crises, the trips to visit your college friend, industry conferences, international partner meetings, acquisition discussions. Another long pause. And I just never knew? You never asked, Dylan. Not once in 6 years did you ever ask about my work beyond the most superficial questions. You made assumptions from the beginning, and I let them stand. Why? The question emerged raw with genuine bewilderment. Why would you hide this from me? Why pretend to be something you're not? It was a fair question, perhaps the only fair one he'd posed throughout our relationship. I owed him at least this much: honesty. At first it was curiosity, I admitted. When we met and you immediately assumed I was in some administrative role, I was intrigued by how quickly you categorized me. I wanted to see if you'd correct that assumption on your own. And after that, after we were serious, after we married, there were 1,000 opportunities to tell me the truth. There were, I agreed. And there were 1,000 moments when you explained my own industry to me, when you dismissed female executives as figureheads, when you treated my opinions as cute but uninformed. Every time I considered revealing the truth, you gave me another reason to maintain the separation. I could almost see him shaking his head, trying to rewrite the narrative in a way that made him less culpable. This is insane. You've been lying to me for our entire relationship. Not lying, I corrected. Withholding. There's a distinction. I never claimed to be anything I wasn't. I allowed you to fill in the blanks with your own assumptions. Semantics, he snapped, anger replacing shock. You deliberately misled me. Perhaps, I conceded. But I'm curious, Dylan. Would you have pursued me if you'd known who I truly was? If you'd known I outranked you professionally, earned exponentially more, and would never need your financial support? His hesitation provided the answer neither of us wanted to verbalize. And more importantly, I continued, would you have emptied our joint account if you'd known who you were stealing from? Silence again, heavier this time. This is why you were able to track everything, he finally said. The offshore accounts, Partech, Alexa. You had your security team following me. Yes, you've been spying on me. His indignation would have been comical under different circumstances. I've been protecting my company from potential compromise, I corrected. Your meetings with Victor Reed raised red flags in our security protocols. The personal surveillance was a secondary concern, though instructive. Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Calculation replacing shock. The businessman re-emerging from the stunned husband. So what now? You've made your point. You're not who I thought you were. But we can work through this. People have overcome. Worse in marriages. I almost admired his pivot, from discovery to damage control in under 5 minutes. It confirmed every assessment I'd made of his character. I'm afraid working through this isn't an option, Dylan. I've already initiated divorce proceedings citing financial misconduct and infidelity. The prenuptial agreement you signed has specific provisions that activate under these exact circumstances. What? Provisions? Wariness crept into his tone. Complete forfeiture of all marital assets and property, for one. The River Oaks house, the vacation properties, the investment accounts. They all revert solely to me. That can't be legal, he protested. No court would. Your lawyer approved the language, I reminded him. Archie was quite impressed with how readily you signed after only a cursory review. I believe your exact words were, I don't need this, but if it makes you feel secure, I'm happy to sign. I could hear him moving around the hotel room now, agitation translating to physical restlessness. Fine, the divorce is your choice, but my position at Horizon is separate. You can't just terminate me because our marriage failed. Your termination has nothing to do with our marriage, I explained. It's based on documented evidence of corporate espionage, accepting bribes from a competitor, and falsifying critical assessment documentation. The board voted unanimously after reviewing the evidence. Evidence that you gathered by spying on me. Evidence that was gathered through standard corporate security protocols when unusual contact with a potential acquisition target was flagged. The same protocols that would apply to any executive under similar circumstances. I checked the time, 10 minutes since Cole's last update. By now, hotel security should have delivered the formal termination packet to your room. It contains details of the severance agreement, which is more generous than legally required given the circumstances. As if on cue, a knock sounded in the background of our call. That would be them now, I said. Wait. Dylan's voice took on the desperate edge of someone seeing their last options disappearing. The money. I can return the money from the joint account. I'll transfer it back immediately. That won't be necessary. The amount you took is insignificant in the larger picture. Insignificant? His voice cracked slightly. It was almost $900,000. Yes, I confirmed, unable to keep a hint of satisfaction from my tone. A rounding error in my actual financial holdings, though I appreciate the insight into your character the theft provided. Another knock, more insistent this time. I need to go, Dylan said quickly. We're not done talking about this. Actually, we are, I replied. The termination packet includes contact information for Horizon's legal team, who will handle all future communication. Please don't attempt to contact me directly again. Rita, wait. I ended the call, setting my phone down on the desk with deliberate care. For a moment, I sat completely still, absorbing the finality of what had just occurred. 6 years of compartmentalized identity collapsed into 15 minutes of revelation. Cassandra, who had witnessed the entire conversation, studied me with concern. Are you okay? I considered the question seriously. The marriage was over. The carefully constructed firewall between my personal and professional lives had been dismantled. The man I'd chosen to share my life with had proven himself exactly what I'd feared. From the beginning, someone who valued me only for what he believed I was, not who I actually was. Yet alongside the grief and disappointment ran a powerful current of relief. The exhausting work of maintaining separate identities was finished. The energy I'd expended navigating Dylan's limitations could now be redirected elsewhere. I'm okay, I said, surprised to find it was true. Better than okay. I feel clarified. My phone lit up with a text from Cole. Package delivered. Subject received termination documents. Security monitoring maintained. Another text followed from Jules. Financial containment complete. All accounts secured. Prenuptial enforcement. Protocols active. And finally, a message from Archie. Divorce filing submitted. Judge Warren assigned to case. Expedited hearing granted due to circumstances. The machinery I'd set in motion was operating with perfect precision, dismantling Dylan's position as methodically as he'd attempted to dismantle our financial foundation. What will you do now? Cassandra asked quietly. I turned to the rain-streaked windows, watching lightning illuminate the Houston skyline. The storm was passing, the dark clouds beginning to thin at the edges. Now I run my company without distraction, I replied. I live in my house without performing a role. I reclaim the energy I've been dividing between two identities. I stood, smoothing my suit jacket with a sense of lightness I hadn't expected. And I never again allow someone else's limitations to define my possibilities. As if responding to my declaration, the sun broke through the clouds, sending a shaft of golden light across the Horizon oil building and into my office. The timing felt significant, not an ending, but an emergence. The phone rang again. Dylan, calling from a different number, desperate to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his grasp. He declined the call without hesitation. The point of no return had been crossed long before today, perhaps the moment he'd dismissed me at that first meeting, perhaps when he'd first considered betraying both his marriage and his company, perhaps when I'd allowed the deception to continue past its natural conclusion. But in this moment, Declining his call felt like the first authentic choice I'd made in years. The choice to finally be fully, unapologetically myself. Rita J. Morgan, no longer divided. After declining Dylan's call, I made a decision that surprised even me. "Cassandra, please clear my schedule for the remainder of the day and tomorrow morning." She raised an eyebrow. In our 8 years working together, I'd never voluntarily stepped away during a crisis. "Are you sure? The Partech fallout will require—" "The team can handle the immediate response," I said with newfound certainty. "Legal knows the parameters, PR has the messaging approved, and operations is already implementing the security protocols. For the next 18 hours, I need space to process." She nodded, understanding the significance. "Where will you go? Not back to River Oaks, I assume." "No." The thought of returning to the house I'd shared with Dylan held no appeal. "I think it's time I visited the ranch." My father's ranch outside Houston had been my childhood home, the one place I'd never brought Dylan, claiming it was rented out after my father's death. In reality, I'd preserved it exactly as it had been, a sanctuary from both my corporate responsibilities and my marital performance. 30 minutes later, I was driving my rarely used personal vehicle, not the modest Audi that fit Rita Parker's persona, but the custom Range Rover that suited Rita J. Morgan's actual preferences, heading northwest on deserted back roads as rain clouds receded in my rearview mirror. The 2-hour drive provided much-needed solitude. No calls, no emails, no pretense, just the hum of the engine and the gradual transition from Houston's urban sprawl to the open spaces of Southeast Texas ranch country. As the familiar limestone entrance pillars appeared, marking the boundary of the Morgan property, I felt the careful compartmentalization of the past 6 years begin to dissolve. Here, I had never been anyone but myself. The main house sat on a gentle rise, a sprawling single-story ranch home built by my grandfather and expanded by my father. Solar. Panels and modern touches blended with traditional architecture, much like Horizon Oil itself, respecting tradition while embracing innovation. I parked in the circular drive and entered using the biometric lock my security team had installed after my father's passing. Inside, the house felt like a time capsule. Family photos lined the entryway, my parents' wedding, my childhood on. Horseback, my father teaching me to fish in the property's spring-fed lake. And there, prominently displayed in the living room, the photo my father had been most proud of. Me, at 26, standing beside him the day he officially made me his successor at Horizon. His health already failing, but his pride unmistakable as we stood before the company headquarters, the Morgan name gleaming on the building behind us. I ran my fingers across the frame, remembering his words that day. "Never let anyone tell you what you can or cannot be, Rita Jean. The world will try to put you in boxes. Your job is to build something so big they can't find a box to fit it." I'd honored that advice professionally, building Horizon into an industry leader that defied conventional categorization. But personally, I'd willingly stepped into the box Dylan had constructed, curious at first, then comfortable, then trapped by my own creation. In the kitchen, I found the refrigerator stocked with fresh groceries. Cole's team maintained the property with characteristic thoroughness. I poured a glass of wine and moved to the back porch, settling into one of the Adirondack chairs that overlooked the property's rolling acres. The sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in spectacular oranges and purples. In the distance, a small herd of deer emerged from the tree line, moving cautiously toward the pond. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the day's corporate and personal drama. My phone buzzed with a text from Cole. "Subject has checked out of Four Seasons Maui. Booked flight to Houston arriving 9:40 a.m. tomorrow." So Dylan was coming home, presumably to attempt damage control in person. His tenacity was almost admirable, if misplaced. I replied with simple instructions. "Continue monitoring. No intervention unless he attempts to access secured locations. Another. Message arrived from Jules. Financial containment holding. Subject attempted access to joint investment accounts via secondary authentication pathway. Access denied. Dylan was testing the boundaries, looking for financial resources I might have overlooked. He would find none. The prenuptial agreement. He'd signed so casually, believing it protected his assets from me rather than mine from him, was comprehensive in its reach. I set the phone aside and closed my eyes, allowing myself to fully experience the emotions I'd been managing all day. Disappointment that the man I'd married had proven exactly as limited as I'd feared. Anger at his betrayal, not just of our marriage, but of the professional trust Horizon had placed in him. Relief that the exhausting charade was finally over, and beneath it all, a question I'd avoided confronting directly. How much responsibility did I bear for the marriage's failure? I'd entered the relationship knowing Dylan had dismissed my capabilities based solely on gender. I'd maintained the deception despite countless opportunities to reveal my true identity. I'd watched his character deteriorate without intervening, observing with clinical detachment rather than attempting to redirect. Had I wanted the marriage to fail? Had I been collecting evidence against Dylan from the beginning, documenting his flaws to justify an eventual separation? The question was uncomfortable but necessary. As CEO, I demanded ruthless self-assessment from my executives. I could offer myself no less. The truth, I realized as darkness settled over the ranch, was more complex than simple sabotage. I genuinely hoped Dylan might evolve beyond his limitations, might recognize my value independent of my professional position. I'd wanted to be loved for myself, rather than my accomplishments or resources. The experiment had failed, but the hypothesis had been sincere. As stars appeared in the Texas sky, my phone lit up with another message, this one from Cassandra. Preliminary Partech stock impact, 42% after market close. Investors calling emergency board meeting. Victor Reed facing possible ouster. The professional consequences were mounting for all involved. Dylan's career in the energy sector was effectively over. No company would hire an executive terminated for corporate espionage and ethics violations. Victor Reed would likely lose his position at Partech once investors fully understood the liability his actions had created. And Alexa Torres, young, ambitious, caught in the crossfire of forces she'd only partially comprehended, would find her career trajectory permanently altered by association. Actions and consequences, choices and repercussions, the fundamental equations that governed both business and personal relationships. I finished my wine as full darkness enveloped the ranch, the only sounds the distant call of night birds and the gentle rustling of oak leaves in the evening breeze. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, legal proceedings, corporate adjustments. But tonight, in this space that had always been authentically mine, I allowed myself the luxury of reflection without performance. For the first time in 6 years, I was simply Rita. Not the CEO, not the wife, just the woman rediscovering the boundaries of her undivided self. I woke at dawn, the ranch house silent around me. After a lifetime in the energy industry, early rising was embedded in my circadian rhythm. I followed my father's old routine, coffee on the porch as the sun crested the eastern tree line, watching the property come alive with morning activity. By 7 a.m., I was showered and dressed in clothes kept at the ranch, not the corporate suits of Rita J. Morgan, CEO, nor the carefully understated attire of Rita Parker, supportive wife, but comfortable, quality pieces that reflected my actual preferences. The symbolic importance wasn't lost on me. New day, authentic self. My phone showed multiple updates from overnight. Cole. Subject landed at Houston International 30 minutes early. Currently in taxi headed toward River Oaks residence. Jules. Financial containment reinforced. All personal. Assets secured with additional authentication measures. Legal team standing by. Cassandra. Morning press coverage of Partech situation beginning. WSJ and Bloomberg running stories on failed acquisition attempt amid ethics concerns. Horizon. Stock up 2.8% in pre-market trading, and most significantly from Archie. Judge Warren granted emergency hearing for 2 p.m. today. Presence optional but recommended. Reed and Torres received preliminary injunctions regarding corporate espionage allegations. Dylan would arrive at our River Oaks home to find it inaccessible. Security codes changed, locks rekeyed overnight by Cole's efficient team. He would discover his credit cards deactivated, corporate accounts terminated, and personal accounts frozen pending the emergency hearing. It was time to coordinate the final phase. I initiated a secure conference call, bringing together the key players who had helped orchestrate this response. Good morning, I began as 4 faces appeared on my screen. Cassandra, Cole, Jules, and Archie, each in their respective locations, prepared for the day ahead. Status updates, please. Jules, start with financial. Jules Parker, my financial security specialist, appeared professionally composed despite the early hour. All containment measures holding. Subject attempted access to 3 separate accounts. Overnight, all blocked by security protocols. The prenuptial enforcement team has prepared complete documentation for today's hearing, including records of the unauthorized withdrawal and subsequent attempt to purchase real estate in the Torres woman's name. Real estate? This was new information. Yes, Jules confirmed. Our monitoring flagged an attempted wire transfer from one of the offshore accounts to a property management company in Aspen. Preliminary paperwork lists Alexa Torres as the intended owner of a $2.1 million condominium. So Dylan had been planning to set Alexa up in luxury accommodations, presumably a place they could retreat to together once the divorce was finalized. The discovery should have hurt, but instead it simply confirmed the correctness of my actions. Cole, security status? Cole Wright's expression remained professionally neutral. Subject arrived at River Oaks residence at 6:22 a.m. Attempted entry unsuccessful due to security modifications. After approximately 15 minutes, subject returned to vehicle and proceeded to Horizon headquarters. He was denied entry per protocol. Subject currently at St. Regis Hotel, checked in approximately 40 minutes ago. I nodded, picturing Dylan's mounting frustration. Has he attempted contact with anyone significant? Multiple calls to both Victor Reed and Alexa Torres. Neither responding. 3 attempts to reach James Robertson from the Horizon board. Robertson following instructions, not to engage directly. Thank you. Cassandra, corporate status? My CFO and closest ally looked tired but focused. Partech situation contained. Their stock opened down 47%, triggering trading circuit breakers. Our PR statement emphasizing Horizon's due diligence in identifying problematic patent issues is being received positively by the market. Our stock is currently up 3.2%. And internally? Your executive team has been briefed on the situation in appropriate detail. The official explanation is that Dylan Parker has been terminated for ethics violations related to the Partech assessment. Your marital connection is being handled, discreetly but not concealed. Perfect. Archie? The silver-haired attorney adjusted his glasses. The emergency hearing is fully prepared. Given the documentation we've assembled, financial misconduct, infidelity, and the attempted property purchase, I anticipate Judge Warren will enforce the prenuptial agreement's punitive clauses in full. Dylan will likely be represented by corporate counsel from Horizon's competitor, Atlas Energy. Atlas? That was interesting. They moved quickly. Opportunistic, Archie agreed. They're hoping to gain inside information about Horizon through Dylan. We've prepared appropriate confidentiality reminders that the judge will enforce. I considered this information, mentally assembling the pieces into a comprehensive picture. Dylan wasn't simply scrambling. He was actively seeking alliances that might leverage his inside knowledge of Horizon. A predictable but concerning development. I'll attend the hearing in person, I decided. Arrange secure transportation from here to the courthouse, please. I don't want to risk encountering Dylan before the proceedings. After concluding the call, I stood on the porch once more, watching a red-tailed hawk circle lazily above the property. The symbolism felt appropriate, patient observation followed by precise action. My team was positioned, the evidence assembled, the strategy deployed. 6 years of compartmentalized living had created the perfect foundation for this moment. I understood Dylan completely, while he had never truly known me at all. In just a few hours, the legal system would formalize what was already functionally accomplished: the complete separation of our lives and the consequences of his miscalculation. For now, in this brief interval between decision and resolution, I allowed myself one final moment of reflection on the marriage that had been. Not with regret, but with acknowledgement, of lessons learned, of patience maintained, of strength revealed. Then I turned back to the house, ready to prepare for what came next. The Harris County Courthouse stood imposing in downtown Houston, its limestone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. I arrived 30 minutes early for the emergency hearing, entering through a private entrance arranged by Archie to avoid potential media or an unexpected confrontation with Dylan. A security conference room had been prepared for our team. Archie, Jules, and a litigation specialist from Horizon's legal department named Morgan Chen. No relation, though the coincidence of surname had always amused us both. Cole remained outside, coordinating security and monitoring Dylan's approach to the eye. "Courthouse. He's just arrived," Cole reported via secure text, accompanied by 2 attorneys from Atlas Energy Legal. Subject appears agitated but composed. Archie reviewed our documentation one final time. Bank records showing the emptied joint account, evidence of the Aspen property attempt, photographs of Dylan and Alexa together in Maui, and most damning records of the offshore account containing Partek's bribe payment. "Remember," Archie cautioned, "we're pursuing the financial misconduct angle primarily. The infidelity supports our case but isn't necessary given the prenuptial language. Judge Warren tends to focus on numbers rather than emotions." I nodded, appreciating his strategic approach. This wasn't about punishing Dylan for the affair. It was about enforcing the consequences clearly outlined in legal documents he had willingly signed. At precisely 1:55 p.m., a court officer appeared to escort us to the courtroom. As we proceeded down the marble hallway, I caught a glimpse of Dylan with his Atlas Energy attorneys in an adjacent corridor. He was dressed in his best suit, the custom Tom Ford he reserved for major presentations, and speaking intensely to a silver-haired attorney who kept shaking his head in apparent disagreement. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance. I saw shock register on his face, likely at my calm demeanor and the professional entourage accompanying me. He had expected to face the Rita he knew, emotional, possibly desperate for reconciliation, certainly overwhelmed by legal proceedings. Instead, he was seeing Rita J. Morgan, CEO, approaching a business negotiation with characteristic preparedness. His expression shifted quickly to something resembling confidence, perhaps bolstered by his expensive legal team and whatever strategy they had devised. I recognized that look, the one he wore when convinced of his superior position despite contrary evidence. The courtroom was relatively small, with traditional wooden furnishings and the Texas state seal prominently displayed behind the judge's bench. Judge Elizabeth Warren, known for her efficiency and intolerance for theatrical tactics, was already seated and reviewing documents when we entered. Dylan and his team took their position at the defendant's table, while we settled at the plaintiff's. The proceedings began promptly at 2 p.m. with introductions and a concise statement of purpose from Judge Warren. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the enforcement of prenuptial provisions in the matter of Morgan versus Parker," she stated. Given the time-sensitive nature of the financial concerns raised, I've reviewed the preliminary documentation submitted by both parties. Let's proceed directly to arguments. Plaintiff first. Archie rose, the picture of seasoned legal authority. Your Honor, the facts in this matter are straightforward. On February 17th, the defendant transferred $896,187.53 from the couple's joint account without the plaintiff's knowledge or consent. He subsequently departed the country with a woman not his wife, with whom he has been conducting an extramarital relationship for approximately 8 months. He presented the bank records, travel documentation, and photographic evidence methodically, without emotional embellishment. The prenuptial agreement signed by both parties in 2019, Section 12.3, explicitly states that unauthorized removal of joint assets exceeding $50,000 constitutes financial misconduct, triggering the punitive clauses outlined in Appendix C. Those clauses stipulate the forfeiture of all marital property rights and the restriction of claims against the plaintiff's separate property or business interests. Judge Warren reviewed the documentation carefully, then turned to Dylan's counsel. Defense response? The silver-haired Atlas attorney stood. Your Honor, while my client acknowledges the transfer occurred, we contend it was not unauthorized. As Mrs. Parker's husband, Mr. Parker had legal access to those joint funds. Furthermore, we believe the prenuptial agreement itself should be invalidated on grounds of fraudulent inducement. A murmur rippled through the small audience of court. Personnel, fraudulent inducement? Judge Warren's tone remained neutral, but her raised eyebrow suggested skepticism. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Parker, or more accurately Ms. Morgan, deliberately concealed her identity and financial status from my client throughout their courtship and marriage. Mr. Parker signed the prenuptial agreement under the false impression that it primarily protected his assets from potential claims by a wife of lesser means. Dylan sat straighter, a small smile forming at the corners of his mouth. This was clearly the strategy he'd pinned his hopes on, painting himself as the victim of deliberate deception. The Atlas attorney continued with growing confidence. Furthermore, Your Honor, my client's recent actions were in direct response to discovering this long-term deception. The funds he transferred were intended to protect his financial interests once he realized the extent of his wife's misrepresentation. Iritos was almost impressive. The complete inversion of reality, transforming Dylan's theft into a defensive measure against my supposed manipulation. Additionally, the attorney continued, warming to his narrative, Mr. Parker's position at Horizon Oil was terminated without due process, in clear violation of his employment contract. We believe this termination was personally motivated by Ms. Morgan's desire for retaliation, rather than based on any legitimate professional concerns. Judge Warren turned to Archie. Counsel, your response to these allegations? As Archie stood, I maintained my composed expression despite the absurdity of Dylan's claims. His momentary confidence, his false sense of triumph in having constructed a sympathetic narrative, would make the coming reality all the more definitive. Archie's response would dismantle Dylan's strategy completely, using his own signed documents and recorded actions against him. The carefully maintained documentation of his corporate espionage would eliminate any claim of wrongful termination. And most devastatingly, Dylan's own words in text messages to Alexa about finally accessing the funds would destroy his narrative of defensive financial action. The false triumph playing across Dylan's features was about to collide with the immovable reality of evidence, contracts, and consequences. Archie rose with the unhurried confidence of someone holding an unbeatable hand. Your Honor, the defense's claims require addressing in reverse order, he began, voice measured and precise. First, regarding Mr. Parker's termination from Horizon Oil. This had nothing to do with marital issues and everything to do with documented corporate espionage. He presented the court with a sealed folder. These documents, which we request remain under protective order due to corporate sensitivity, contain evidence of Mr. Parker accepting bribes from Partech Industries while conducting acquisition assessment duties for Horizon Oil. Judge Warren reviewed the contents, her expression remaining neutral, though her eyes widened slightly at certain pages. Second, regarding the claim that my client's transfer of funds was somehow defensive or protective in nature. Archie produced another document. This is a text message exchange between Mr. Parker and Ms. Alexa Torres dated February 16th, the day before the account was emptied. The court officer handed copies to Dylan's attorneys, who reviewed them with growing dismay. As you can see, Mr. Parker writes, and I quote, "Finally accessing those funds tomorrow. Almost $900K should set us up nicely until the divorce is final. She'll never know what hit her until it's too late." Ms. Torres responds, "What about your job?" To which Mr. Parker replies, "Once the Partech deal goes through, I'll have options well beyond Horizon." Dylan's face drained of color as his own words undermined his entire defense. The Atlas attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm, as Dylan shifted forward, clearly wanting to speak. Finally, regarding the fraudulent inducement claim, Archie paused, allowing the absurdity to settle over the courtroom. "Your Honor, at no point did my client ever misrepresent her identity. She used her legal name, Rita Morgan, throughout their relationship. She maintained her maiden name professionally, which is both common and her legal right." He produced the marriage certificate. Mr. Parker knew he was marrying Rita Morgan. The fact that he never inquired about or discovered her professional position as CEO of Horizon Oil reflects his lack of interest in her career, not any deception on her part. The judge turned to Dylan's attorney. "Counsel, your response?" The silver-haired lawyer looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, may we request a brief recess to confer with our client?" "Denied," Judge Warren replied firmly. "This is an emergency hearing, not a trial. Your response to the evidence presented?" The attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while the text messages are concerning, they don't change the fundamental issue that Mr. Parker was unaware of his wife's true financial position when signing the prenuptial agreement." "Did your client read the prenuptial agreement before signing it?" Judge Warren asked. "Well, yes, but—" "And did the agreement clearly outline the consequences for unauthorized removal of joint funds?" "Technically, yes, but the context—" "And does Mr. Parker deny transferring these funds without his wife's knowledge or consent?" The attorney glanced at Dylan, who was now staring fixedly at the table before him. "No, Your Honor. But again, the context—" "The context," Judge Warren interrupted, "appears to be that Mr. Parker voluntarily signed a legal document whose terms he now finds inconvenient after violating them." She turned to Archie. "Regarding the corporate espionage allegations, is Horizon Oil pursuing criminal charges?" "Not at this time, Your Honor," Archie replied. "The company has chosen to handle the matter through termination and civil remedies, provided Mr. Parker ceases all contact with competitors regarding Horizon intellectual property or business strategies." Judge Warren nodded, then addressed Dylan directly for the first time. "Mr. Parker, do you wish to make any statement before I rule on this matter?" Dylan finally looked up, his composed facade crumbling. His gaze shifted from the judge to me, equal parts anger and disbelief in his expression. "This is insane," he said, voice strained. 6 years of marriage, and I never knew who she really was. How is that not deception? How is that not fraud? "Did you ever ask her directly about her position at Horizon Oil?" Judge Warren inquired. Dylan hesitated. "Not specifically, but did she ever claim to hold a position different from her actual role?" "No, but she allowed me to believe—" "Mr. Parker," Judge Warren interrupted, "allowing someone to maintain their own assumptions is not fraud. Now, did you or did you not transfer nearly $900,000 from your joint account without your wife's knowledge or consent?" The direct question hung in the courtroom air. Dylan's shoulders slumped slightly. "Yes," he admitted. "But I had reasons." "Those reasons being, according to your own text messages, to set up yourself and Ms. Torres while your wife would never know what hit her?" Dylan had no response. Judge Warren gathered her papers. "Based on the evidence presented, I find the prenuptial agreement valid and enforceable. The defendant's actions clearly trigger the punitive clauses outlined in Section 12.3 and Appendix C. All marital property reverts to the plaintiff, and the defendant is barred from making any claims against the plaintiff's separate property or business interests. She signed the order with a decisive stroke. Additionally, I am issuing a temporary restraining order, preventing Mr. Parker from accessing any properties owned by Mrs. Morgan or Horizon Oil, or contacting Mrs. Morgan directly. Further property division details will be addressed in the formal divorce proceedings. She struck her gavel once. This emergency hearing is adjourned. As the judge departed, Dylan sat motionless, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Everything he had built, career, lifestyle, future plans, had collapsed in less than 24 hours. His Atlas attorneys were already gathering their materials, their expressions suggesting they recognized a lost cause when they saw one. The silver-haired lawyer leaned down to whisper something to Dylan, who shook his head vehemently in response. I rose with my team, maintaining my professional composure despite the mixture of vindication and sadness I felt. As we prepared to leave, Dylan finally looked directly at me, his expression a complex blend of anger, bewilderment, and dawning comprehension. You planned this, he said, just loud enough for me to hear, all of it. You knew exactly what I would do. I paused, considering his accusation. The truth was both simpler and more complex than he imagined. No, Dylan, I replied quietly. I simply knew who you were. You did the rest yourself. 1 month after the courthouse confrontation, the dust had begun to settle into new patterns. The divorce was finalized with unprecedented speed, Judge Warren citing the comprehensive prenuptial agreement and clear-cut triggering events in her approval of the expedited process. Dylan had vacated our shared life as thoroughly as he had once occupied it. The River Oaks house remained mine, though I'd already listed it with a discreet real estate agent. Too many memories permeated its walls, too many performances had been staged in its rooms. I'd moved permanently to the ranch, commuting to Horizon, headquarters when necessary but increasingly managing operations remotely. The business consequences had cascaded predictably. Partech's stock never recovered from the failed acquisition and ethical scandal. They were now being broken up and sold in pieces to competitors. Victor Reed had resigned in disgrace, facing potential SEC investigations into his leadership practices. Alexa. Torres had disappeared from the Houston professional scene entirely. According to Cassandra's sources, she'd relocated to Denver and changed industries, a young career derailed by involvement with the wrong married executive. I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. She'd been collateral damage in a situation whose full dimensions she hadn't comprehended. As for Dylan, his professional exile was comprehensive but not absolute. Through intermediaries, I'd ensured he wouldn't face criminal charges for the Partech bribery, provided he signed robust non-disclosure agreements regarding both Horizon's business operations and our personal relationship. His Atlas Energy connection had evaporated once they realized he had no valuable insider information to offer. Last I heard, he'd found a position with a small renewable energy startup in Arizona, far from the oil industry and far from Houston. A significant step down from his Horizon executive role, but not professional extinction. I hadn't wished for his complete destruction, only his removal from my carefully constructed world. The personal consequences were more complex to categorize. Friends from our shared social circle had divided predictably along loyalty lines, most gravitating toward me once the basic facts became known. The stories varied in their details. Some said Dylan had embezzled company funds, others that he'd been caught in an affair with a colleague. But all contained the essential truth. He had betrayed both marriage and professional ethics simultaneously. My executive team had adjusted to the public merging of my identities with professional aplomb. The board expressed only mild surprise that I'd maintained such comprehensive separation between personal and professional spheres. James Robertson, our longest-serving member, had simply nodded and said, "Always suspected there was more to you than met the eye, Rita." Though even I didn't imagine this particular scenario. The most profound changes, however, were internal. No longer maintaining the exhausting compartmentalization between Rita Parker and Rita J. Morgan, I found myself with unexpected reserves of energy and mental clarity. Decision-making became more streamlined, leadership more authentic, personal relationships more genuine. I'd begun having regular dinners with Cassandra and Jules outside the office, something I'd rarely done during my marriage, always conscious of maintaining the boundary between my two worlds. We'd become something more than colleagues but different from friends, women who had shared a unique experience of power, deception, and revelation. "Have you heard from him?" Jules asked during one such dinner, 3 wine glasses deep into a conversation about rebuilding after significant life upheavals. "No," I replied truthfully. "The non-disclosure agreement works both ways. Clean break, no contact." "Do you regret any of it?" Cassandra asked, the directness that made her an excellent CFO extending to personal matters as well. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the 6 years with Dylan? The elaborate charade? The revelation and its aftermath? "I regret the necessity," I finally answered. "I regret that I couldn't be my full self from the beginning and still be accepted. But I don't regret the clarity it ultimately provided." I lifted my glass, the rich Texas Merlot catching the restaurant's soft lighting. "To integration," I proposed. "To being fully ourselves, without division or diminishment." As we clinked glasses, I recognized something I hadn't fully acknowledged during the turmoil of the past months. I was happier now. Lighter. More authentically myself than I'd been since inheriting my father's company and confronting the gender realities of the energy industry. It had taken a catastrophic betrayal to shatter the artificial boundaries I'd constructed. But perhaps those boundaries had always been destined for collapse. Perhaps this ending had been written into the beginning, necessary for my eventual wholeness. 6 months after Dylan emptied our joint account and unwittingly triggered the collapse of the careful barriers between my identities, I stood on the side deck of my father's ranch house, my house now in both name and spirit, watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The company had thrived in the aftermath. Freed from the energy-draining compartmentalization of my dual life, I'd implemented strategic initiatives that had been percolating for years. Horizon Oil had expanded into renewable technologies, acquired 2 struggling competitors at advantageous prices, and increased market share by 8.7% in a single quarter. The headlines in industry publications had shifted from the salacious details of a CEO's personal drama to the remarkable business transformation under my now public leadership. Morgan's vision reshapes energy landscape, replaced oil exec's double life revealed when husband steals funds. On a personal level, the integration of my formerly divided self continued to yield unexpected benefits. I'd reconnected with college, friends long neglected due to the complications of maintaining separate identities. I'd begun mentoring young women in the industry, sharing lessons from my unusual journey without the necessity of obscuring key details. I'd even started dating again, cautiously, selectively, and with complete transparency about who I was. The freedom to be fully myself from the first interaction was exhilarating after years of calculated performance. My phone buzzed with a text from Jules. Financial Times interview confirmed for Tuesday. They want to focus on female leadership in energy sector transformation. Another notification followed immediately, this one from Cassandra. Q3 projections exceeding expectations. Board dinner next week to discuss expansion opportunities. I smiled, no longer needing to hide these professional communications or manufacture explanations for my attention to business matters. The simple authenticity of acknowledging my work without apology or diminishment still felt like a luxury. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, I reflected on what I'd learned from the strangest experiment of my life, a 6-year study in identity, assumption, and the boxes we allow others to create for us. Dylan had emptied our joint account, believing he was leaving me destitute, never imagining he was stealing from the CEO of the company that employed him. The irony remained satisfying, but increasingly it felt like a chapter closed rather than a defining moment. What lingered instead was the recognition that while Dylan had acted as the catalyst, the revelation had been inevitable. No one can live divided indefinitely. The energy required to maintain artificial boundaries eventually exceeds the perceived benefits of separation. The questions I'd once asked about Dylan, whether he could evolve beyond his limitations, whether he might recognize value beyond his preconceptions, now seemed less important than the questions I'd finally answered about myself. What happens when we stop accommodating others' limited vision of who we are? What becomes possible when we refuse to be diminished for someone else's comfort? The answers surrounded me, in the thriving company I led openly, in the authentic relationships I now cultivated, in the integrated self I presented to the world. My husband had emptied our joint account for his mistress, never suspecting I owned the business that paid his salary. But in attempting to leave me with nothing, he had inadvertently given me the most valuable gift possible, the freedom to be completely, unapologetically myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.